Okay, welcome back. My name is Mark Moikins from Big Mount Studio, and we're going to continue this video series in building this little demo application here. In this video, we're going to talk more about the usage of fonts and scaling them for different sizes of devices. So the first thing I was talking about in the last video was we're going to add a background to this big mountain because it's kind of hard to see. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy and paste it, and I'm going to have one right on top of the other. Like so. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to make the one in the back black. Like that. Hey guys, I wanted to interrupt my previous video because what I was about to show you was how you can create a backdrop using two different labels. One with one that's black and one that's white to basically create this drop shadow. But I found out there's actually a really easy way to do this without having to go through this. So you just delete your black one, and then for your label there's actually a property right down here called shadow, and we can just set that to black, and then we can just adjust the height and width to give it the right offset that you want. So we'll just do something like this. There, that's all. Super easy. You don't have to create another label and then add constraints to it. If you continue watching these videos, just keep that in mind. Ignore that second label for now, because I'll be continuing through this video series resizing that label to make the big mountain stand out more. Okay, so there's my backdrop. For Studio here, if you want to give it a custom font, you can come through here and you can preview other fonts. I think in my original application I used one of these fonts, these Kohinoor fonts. Yeah, maybe it was this one. Yeah, that looks fine. We'll just leave it like that. And let's move it up a little bit here. I'm going to decrease this constraint so it makes it a little bit closer to Big Mountain. There, that looks fine. Okay, now let's take a look at something here. Give ourselves some more space. I want to preview what this text or this what I have so far is going to look like on different size devices. So an easy way to do that is to click on this button up here, and this is your assistant editor. By default, what the assistant editor does is shows the view controller code that's associated with the scene, the view controller scene. So this is the default code that was provided. So I'm going to click here and click on preview, and by default it's going to show me the preview of the main storyboard. What preview does is it does its best to render the phone in a certain size. So here, this is your iPhone SE. Let's delete that. What I'm going to do is add the smallest size, and then add one of the bigger sizes, the 7 Plus. There we go. Let's zoom out a little bit so you can see that. Oh, too much. And then I'm going to add another bigger size, which is the iPad Pro 12.9 inch. Okay. You can probably spot some problems right off the bat. Big Mountain does a good job, this label right here does a good job of filling up that top part. But you notice it gets smaller. It's still not too bad on this one. But then when you get to the iPad, it's kind of small, and in the center there, it kind of gets lost because it's too small. The blur effect with the text in there, you notice on the iPad it might also look a little bit too small to read, and it doesn't quite fit that inside of that blur effect either. So let's fix that. So the first thing we're going to do is click on this text right here. Now the reason why it's filling up this iPhone 7 pretty well is because of something we did in the first video. We gave it a larger size, a font size of 17. Then we changed the auto shrink, and we told it to use a minimum font size of 14. So what's happening here is in this iPhone 4S, it's using the font size 14. And in here on the iPhone 7 Plus, it's using the font size of 17. And because 17 is the highest font size here, that's also what it's using on our iPad. It's using 17. So it's really easy to fix this. All you have to do is just keep increasing this font size until it fills up this blur effect. So we can give it a higher number, like let's try 48. I'm just going to guess here. So you can still get bigger. You still have plenty of space in there. Oh no, it just updated. Yeah, we could probably still fit in another line in that space. So let's change it to like 60. Takes a little while to update. Yeah, we can still go larger. Let's try 80. Okay, it's not increasing, so it must have hit the maximum size that it can without overflowing. So I guess it was probably like around 60 or something like that was the biggest size that it could use. But if you're using the automatic font size or the auto shrink, it's not going to get any bigger than the size of the label. So you can actually change that font size to 120 and it will still won't go above the size of the label, of its own containing label. So that's how we deal with that right there. Now for Big Mountain, that one's going to be a little bit different because the size, let me see if I can describe this correctly. We changed the height of the label to fit perfectly for this font. You know, remember we changed the size of the height of the label so we could see the bottom of the G. So no matter how wide that label is or how big I make it, it's not going to go outside of that size. Let me show you. So we're going to change this to minimum font size. And this number right here, this is the smallest number you want for your smallest device. So 24 is fine. It doesn't really seem to change that much. Now let's go and change this to an even bigger size. Let's make it like 120. What we'll do first is we'll change one font or one label until it's the right size that we want, and then we'll change that drop shadow. So for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this drop shadow right here. Actually, let's give that a name just so you can see which one is which. Let's add drop shadow here. Changing the name doesn't really do anything as far as like how it's going to be rendered or how the program's going to run. So you can change the names of these controls if it helps you out. Okay, and I'm going to hide this for now. Okay, let's change the alpha to 0. Okay. Oops. All right. Now you see this size right here. And let me show you something here. Notice, let me close this out first, because it really affects your performance when it's trying to render and update all those other views that I have. So I'm going to close down the preview. And I want to show you something that's interesting about this font. Notice how you can see the label size actually comes all the way up here, and there's a lot of space on top. There's a way to fix that, and the reason why it's doing that is it's because of this property right here, baselines. What we can do is we can change the baseline so it lines more in the center, like that. So now it's using this space more appropriately. So that looks a lot better when it's line centers. Baseline, by the way, what that means is that's the line, like the imaginary line that the font is resting on. So we're changing the baseline from align baselines, from what I can tell, is basically like the bottom down below. And I don't know why the imaginary line would be down there, but we're going to change the imaginary line so it's more in the center. And what does none show us? Yeah, look at that. It goes way up to the top. I have no idea why it does that, but align center seems to work best. So let's stick with that. And we see now that we'll have to change the height to make it bigger. But there's something else I want to show you. So we're going to use, we've changed this so the font size can be anywhere between 120 to 24. And it'll resize itself so it fits the constraint of this label. Now we can see that the width is okay. It's stopping. It's not growing any further because of the width. So what we're going to do is we need to make the size bigger. And I'm going to show you a little trick of how we can handle this. What we use is we're going to use a different constraint here. Right now we have a height constraint on there, but I'm going to change it. And I want this title to be a percentage of the total height of this view. What I mean by that is, imagine that this height is 100%. I want the title up here, Big Mountain, to be the top 10% of whatever the view is. Now let me show you how to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drag, and I'm going to create the constraint against the underlying view, and I'm going to change it to equal heights. Now as you can see, it changed the height to the full height of the view. And this is just temporary. So now the constraint actually has two heights. Equal height to the view and this height of 70. We don't need this height of 70 anymore, because that's like a conflicting constraint. But what we want to do is we want to click on that label, and if we go over here and find that equal constraint that we just added, right here, equal height to superview, what we want to change is this multiplier right here. The multiplier, I don't see any good use for it when it's used on a standard constraint like this constraint right here, where it tells the label to be 20 from the leading edge. When you add the multiplier, all that does is it just makes it bigger compared to the constant, right? It like multiplies this number by the constant. And like I said, I don't really see a use for that. So let's change that back to 0, or back to 1 rather. And where I do see it has a good use is here. And when I want to change the multiplier, right now it's like 100%, right? But if I start to minimize this, notice the size is 50%. Like as it is right now, this label is 50% of the view. And now it's 40%, 30%, 20%, 10%. So I said I want it to be 10%, but it looks like I'm going to need it to be a little bit bigger because we can't see the bottom of that G. So let's just modify this, make it 0.015. That looks okay. Let me keep minimizing it until I find the right one. Okay, 0.14. Looks like we can still go a little bit smaller. 1.3. Okay, starting to get cut off right there. So let's just stick with 0.14. And there we go. So the title here will be 14% of the top of the view. And if we could see what that looks like in our other devices. Go back here, change automatic to preview. Let's give ourselves some more space. Okay, that looks good. You can see here it's 14%, 14%. And because we changed that constraint, I think it changed the constraint from Studio to Big Mountain. So let's take a look at that, and we might have to fix that. Here it is, top space to Big Mountain. That actually looks okay. You know what? Let me see. Let's expand this. I bet that's the drop shadow. Yeah. Okay, so it's still constrained to the drop shadow, which will be okay. We just have to now fix the drop shadow so it matches our title. So let's do that now. So that should fix it. And if we see the preview for the iPad, that looks perfect. Okay. Now the next thing we have to handle is the size of Studio. So can you guess of a way to handle Studio? A good way to handle that? I've given you two choices. Or actually, we've only used one choice, really. And that's basically the auto shrink on the font size. But I've given you a couple ways on how you can adjust the container of the label. One is using that that equal widths or equal height constraint, and then changing the multiplier. But I don't think we have to do that here. I think what we can do is we could just change this constant and make it bigger. And then let's change the font size. Let's make it, give it the minimum font size here. And for the smaller devices, I think 14 will actually be okay. But for the larger sizes, let's click on this and see. Yeah, that still looks okay if we increase that font size. So let's do this. Let's make it look good on the larger size, and then we can change the minimum size to make it look good on the smaller devices. Probably don't want 120. Maybe I'll just go to something like 80. And we'll have to change the height here. And I'll just make that 50. Give it time to update. Yeah, that's a good size right there. So 50, let's make the font smaller, the largest size smaller. So it looks good on the larger device. Yeah, that looks good on the largest device. And it still looks way too big on these smaller ones. You know, I just realized we can't do this the way we're doing it right now, because we have a fixed font height. I mean, not a fixed font height. We have a fixed label height here for the constraint. And so what we really need is we need a smaller size for these different devices. So let's fix that. I've made a mistake. I thought the font size would increase and decrease based on height, but it doesn't. It seems to only work with width. See that? When we make it the width more narrow, it'll make the font smaller. All right, that's good to know. So that gives us an idea of what we need to do. Let me undo this. Get it back to the way it was. Like that. Okay, now that we know the width is the thing that has to be changed, then let's just do that. Let's go back up to our constraint. And let's change that back to 50. And delete this. And instead, what we want is we want a width constraint, because that's what affects the font size. Let's get rid of those constraints for the leading and the trailing space. Okay. And let's keep it centered. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to center it horizontally. And what I want to do is, let's find the right size for this screen. This actually looks fine right here. And what width is that? That width is, let's make it 90. Okay, so let's add a constraint for that. Make the width 90. Okay, good. And I'm going to click this button to update the frame, because you can see that something is off because there's yellow on there. All right, perfect. So that's the size we want. And I want to scoot this up a little bit. So you might know of a couple ways to do that. One is we could adjust the top of the constraint, but we can also align the baselines to align center, and that moves it closer. Okay, good. Now from here, let's go back to preview mode and see what it looks like on the iPad. Or no, I'm just going to click on the iPad right here and see what it looks like. Way too small, right? Okay, so I'm going to click on that constraint, and I'm going to add a new one. And notice it defaults to regular. And then I'm going to increase this size right here. Let's try 120. That looks good. Maybe a little bit bigger. 130. All right, that's fine. Okay, and that's all we're going to do for this video. We just wanted to play with the fonts and adjust them and make them fit all kinds of different devices. And it looks like we have a pretty good working model right now. The fonts look pretty good in all the different sizes that we have here. And there's just one last thing I notice here. See how the G is getting cut off right there? So we might have to fix that constraint right here. Let's make that 1.5. There we go. That's good. Okay, looks a lot better. I'm going to come down here. Let's preview that. That looks fine too. Oh, one thing. I've noticed this about like this custom font right here. See how it looks like it's getting cut off on the edge here? A way I found to fix that is simply add a space to the end. I know it seems kind of like a cheap trick, but that's the only way I found how to fix that. All right, there we go. Now it looks better. Okay, well, thank you for watching. On the next video, we'll continue and talk about the buttons that we're going to add down below and how to customize those.